Okay guys, we are ready to do our first block of the mystery quilt, and so this is January's block. We have to make 2 of these blocks. They're the exact same fabrics, but we have to make 2 of them. So I've already done one of them, and so let's get started on the next one. Okay, so in the email, hopefully you all received the email that I sent out last week, and I told you were going to need some batting, so I was recommending the project batting. If you don't use the project batting, just whatever batting you start with here in January, I would make sure you're going to use that same batting throughout the whole year, so it's the same weight. And then you're also going to need, as far as your stabilizer, the poly mesh stabilizer. So either the OESD poly mesh or the Kimberbell light mesh cutaway. And then you're also, we talked about in the email, that you are going to need the SF101 interfacing. And then on the shopping list that I gave you today, I have listed the little OESD thread box. So I'm just going to keep my thread in one of the thread boxes all year long. And so that way I'm going to keep all of my thread that I'm using on the quilt for the entire year in one place. And then so it's a 2 double stacker, and you can actually stack them on top of each other, and so I can put all my threads for the project. And then I went ahead and put some pre-wound bobbins, some extra Kimberbell tape. We are going to be needing some of the wash away thread eventually in one of the blocks. And then I thought, since I might have to borrow a spool of thread for another project throughout the year, I took some of the Kimberbell tape, and underneath each thread I wrote the name and then the color number. So if I take this out for another project, I'll remember which thread needs to go back for my quilt for the year. Okay, I'm going to talk to you, before we start sewing the block, I'm going to talk to you about your design files that you're going to be getting from Kimberbell. So what I did on my USB stick, I've just created a folder for 2025, or you could call it Mystery Quilt or whatever you're going to call it. Once you download the files each month, so I have, this one is the January block, so it's going to be this folder right there. When you open that folder up, you're not going to have shop resources. Ignore that. So you're just going to have all the, can you see that? I'm going to try to make this bigger. Okay, so you're going to have all these different folders, okay? The first folder is the background quilting. Then you have the embroidery files. You're going to have the instructions, which the instructions, if you've come to the meeting, I've printed those off for you. And then you will also have SVG files. I'm not doing any of the pre-cutting. So those are if you have like a scan and cut or a Cricut and you want to cut out your applique patterns with one of those, but I'm not going to do any of that. So, what I'm trying to tell you is, once you've downloaded these files, there's a lot in here, and you're going to end up with all 12 months, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to delete the things that I don't need, so it's not taking as much space up on my USB stick. So the SVG files I'm not going to use, so I'm just going to click once on those and delete that whole folder. Now also, when you go into like the embroidery files, when you open that folder up, you're going to have all these different formats. And unless you have one of each of those machines, you don't need all of those formats. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to delete the ones that I don't need. So I'm going to click on one of them, hold down the control key on my keyboard, and I'm just going through, and all I am saving, so I'm going to skip over PES because I want the PES ones. I'm going to delete every one of those, and that way they're not taking up space on my USB. Now you want to do the same thing. I'm going to come back here, and in the folder that's for the background quilting, this is kind of neat. I'm going to show you. So when you go into the background quilting, there's going to be different, maybe I'm assuming they may repeat the same background quilting on some of the blocks, but there may be different ones each month. So when I go into that background quilting folder and then go into embroidery files, you're going to have block by block and clear blue tiles. So you're getting the design files for both of those types of quilting. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the difference in the block by block and the clear blue tiles here in a minute. We are going to be using the block by block. So throughout this whole quilt, I'm assuming, now this may change because I haven't seen all the instructions, most of our blocks are going to be done with the block by block method. Now, once you go into those block by block and also the clear blue tiles, you're going to have, again, all of the different formats for the different machines. So once again, I'm going to go in here, I'm holding down my control key, and I'm going to select all the different formats that I don't need, and I'm going to delete those. And then I might as well go ahead and do that for the clear blue tiles also. So I'm just going to go back into the clear blue tile folder and delete. Ah, missed that one. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back into, since we're using the block by block method, I'm going to open up my PES. You are not just getting one file. You're getting the quilting designs for the block by block and the clear blue tiles for all the different sizes. And I actually even called Kimberbell and asked, are the consumers, because I thought, okay, maybe they just sent the dealers all of those files, but no, you are getting all of those files. So this, if you'd gone onto the website, this would have cost you at least $12 for each quilt design to get all of those different sizes. So it's pretty cool. But that's going to take up, if you leave all of those different formats, you have all of those different formats with all of those different design files, that's taking up a lot of space on your USB stick. So we just go through and we're going to clean up. And so each month as I get the design files, I'm going to clean up and delete the ones that I don't need off of my USB stick, so I'm not taking up so much space on my USB stick. Okay, so some of your, well, okay, first of all, back up. What's going to be in your kit, you're going to have 2 of everything, because you've got to make 2 of these blocks. So you'll have 2 of the background pieces and then 2 of each of the applique pieces. And part of the prep work is to iron a piece of the SF101 onto the back of each one of these. And so I was just going to show you, like when I go and I cut out my SF101, I lay the SF101 down on my cutting table with the bumpy side up, and then I lay the piece of fabric down on top of it, but I kind of offset it just a little bit because I want that SF101 to be just a little bit smaller than my fabric, because I don't want to get the SF101 onto my ironing board. So that's how I cut out my pieces, and then I just take my rotary cutter and go right up the side of it and cut the piece out. And then when I get ready to start pressing, I'm going to, I starch all of my pieces first. And so if you'll spray the spray starch on the wrong side of your fabrics, and then just press them real good and starch everything. And then before I start, oh, that block is crooked. Sorry, y'all. So what I do is I take and I spritz the fusible side, so the bumpy side of the interfacing, I spritz with water and get the piece wet, and then lay it down on the wrong side of my fabrics and fuse everything. So when you spray the, when you starch the fabric, that helps get some of the shrinkage out of the fabric. And then when you spray the SF101 with the water, that helps, one, get some of the shrinkage out of that, and it helps the fusible, the bumpy side of the interfacing adhere to your fabric a little bit better. So that's how I ironed all of the interfacing onto the back of my fabric blocks. So now we're going to go to the machine. Okay, so we're on the instructions, okay, for each block. So we are doing, so this is saying January block. It's telling us here we need to make 2 of these blocks. So these 2 are the exact same fabrics and everything. That has a list of the different fabrics and how big they are. And then this is saying we needed the fusible backing, has ironed the fusible backing to the wrong side of all the fabric pieces. Here's a list of our threads. It is recommending that we do the quilting in the cream color. So that's what I've threaded up on the machine. And I can look at my thing. It's the Candlewick, the 0781 is what I'm using for the quilting. And so now this is where we're getting to the instructions that some of you may have done the block by block quilting, some of you may not have. So we are starting, I'm going to go through today especially and go through and try to explain the block by block quilting method. So first of all, it's telling us which quilting design we're going to be using. So the spring number 7 is the one that they gave us this month, and then we're going to be using the 6x8 design. Okay, so remember they gave us all the different sizes. We want to use the 6x8. The 6.5 by 8.5, that is the actual sewing area that your machine needs to have. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in a minute. And then, okay, and then it's saying here the special alignment. So this is telling us that we're going to align the block embroidery, which is the floral design. We're going to align the bottom of that design with the bottom of our quilting design. So I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. And then it does have a note down here about 5x7 or smaller hoops. You can do the actual embroidery design, the flower block, in a 5x7 hoop, but you cannot do the quilting file. So I don't think anybody has just a 5x7 hoop. I think everybody has a larger hoop than that. But if you do, come talk to me. Also, I need to talk to if there's anybody that has a 6x10 embroidery machine, that a 6x10 is the largest embroidery area that you have. I need to kind of get with you separate. Even though the design files, like they're calling our quilt design a 6x8, okay? So you would think, okay, yeah, that'll fit in a 6x10 hoop. I want to show you something on the machine. If I go into my machine and I'm going to go pull up the design off of my USB stick. So I'm going to the USB stick. I'm going to show you kind of the process you have to go through. So we have to go into our January block. I'm going to go get the embroidery files. Okay, so here's the embroidery files. Okay, you have embroidery files, and then you have background quilting. So you have 2 separate folders. I'm going to go get the quilting design. That's the one I want to look at. So that's going to be your first folder. And there's the spring. And in the embroidery files, I want the block by block method. I want my PES, so you're going to have a lot of folders you've got to go to. And then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to go get the 6x8 folder. Now, on this particular machine, I can see the name of the design all the way across here. On some machines, you can't. So once I select that 6x8 design, it's going to tell me it's 8.5 by 6.5. So if you can't see the actual name of the file or the design that you're picking, go ahead and select it and then look at the size. So we're looking for the 8.5 by 6.5 design. Okay, so once I set that, if you have, can you zoom in on the screen? I've pulled up the sewing area. So this black dotted line is the sewing area for a 6x10 hoop. and see how part of my quilting design, these little lines over here, are extending past that 6x10 area. Okay, so if you have only a 6x10 sewing area, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete those two lines going down each of your quilt files, and then they will fit in your hoop. So just get with me later and I'll explain how to do that. The hoops that really work best, what I've kind of figured out to use, the ones that I'm going to use are like the 8x12 hoop. That's a good size because you can use a little bit smaller. You don't have to use the great big pieces of stabilizer if you have a bigger hoop, but everything will fit within the 8x12 hoop. So that's the one I'm using. Or you could also use the 9.5 by 9.5. You cannot use the 8x8. I don't think that one would work. It has to be the 8x12. Okay, so now we're going to go back to your instructions, and I've printed off, if you're here in the meeting, I've printed off the instructions for the block itself, but then also I've printed off, and I'm going to give you this, you're going to have these instructions. These are for the actual quilt design, okay? If you're not here in class, these instructions are found in the background quilting folder that's on your USB stick. So in the background quilting folder, you're going to have these instructions. I've printed off, I believe, page 3, and it cut off the page numbers. I think it was page 3 through 8 is what you have here in your handout. So for the introduction, and this is just these two paragraphs are explaining the difference between the clear blue tile quilting and the block by block quilting. And then here are some key differences also. Basically, the results are will explain the differences between the two. The clear blue tiles, it's a continuous all over or custom quilting throughout the project. So you've quilted your quilt and you're doing your quilt all over, or you've pieced your quilt and you're doing the quilting all over the entire quilt. The block by block, and this is what we're doing for our blocks, most of them, each block or border is quilted with its own quilting design. So it kind of explains the differences there. Then over here on the next page, okay, we have somebody crying. Okay. She is not back there by herself. Her daddy is back there with her. But if she's hungry, she needs her mommy. Okay, so this page is just talking about like what embroidery hoop size should I use. So I just kind of explained that. And then here, this little chart is a good one. So you have all the different sizes of the quilting designs. We're using the 6x8 here, and so it's telling you the actual sewing area is 6.5 by 8.5. So the file name is 6x8, but that's the actual sewing area. And then also here, this is a good little chart. It's telling you, okay, for the 6x8 design, you need to cut your batting or your project batting 7x9. Now, this month, I'm going to do it the Kimberbell way. So I cut my batting 7x9. Next month, I'm going to show you my way, which I think saves a little bit of batting and I think also saves a little bit of time. But this month, we're going to do it the proper way. And so I cut my batting 7x9. Now here it's talking about the different ways to combine the quilting design with your embroidery design or our flower design. So I'm going to show you option number 1 and option number 3. Option number 2 is done with software, and so not everybody has software, so I'm going to show you option 1 and option 3. All right. So option number 1, to combine our designs together. This is my quilting design here. Okay, and so remember, we've got to pay attention to our special alignment. Okay, so this was telling us that the bottom of the embroidery design needs to be at the bottom of the quilting design. So we're looking to line it up down here at the bottom. So I've got my quilt design up, and then I'm going to add. So you either add, or some machines you do the little plus, however you combine designs together. And then I'm going to go back to my USB stick, go through the process again, go into the January folder, And now I'm going to go into the embroidery files, not the background quilting folder, but the embroidery files. So your background quilting folder is going to be number 1. Embroidery files is going to be number 2. Go into the PES, and there's my flower design. Set that. Okay. Can you zoom in on the screen? Okay. So what I want to happen is I want the bottom of this design. So see how the design has the red box around it? I want that design to come straight down here. Okay. I'm going to go into edit and go to move. Don't just drag it down with your finger. Some machines are a touch screen and you can drag it down. If you do that, you can accidentally move it left to right. And this one's exactly centered, just down towards the bottom. So I'm just going to use my arrows and see how I'm moving it down. And I want that design all the way down at the bottom. Now, so that's one way. And then once we start sewing, when I send that to the embroidery screen, okay, it's going to stitch the quilting, and then it's going to go directly into the design. Now, if you combine your designs this way, so we've combined the quilting and the embroidery design on the machine. It's going to do the quilting and then go directly into the embroidery design. If you do that, you just need to note that the stitch number up here is going to be off from your instructions. So because the instructions here are for just the embroidery design. So step number 9, where it stitches the flower detail, it's not going to be step number 9 on your machine because we have several steps from the quilting file that it's doing first. So just make a mental note. Your color number or the step number that you're on your machine is going to be different from your instructions if you combine them together on screen. Okay. Option number 2 of combining your designs together is go ahead and stitch the quilting design, and don't worry, I'm going to show you all the steps to do that. Stitch that design off. Then go and bring your block design or the flower design up, and then to line it up, what we're going to do is go, like on these machines, you can go into the trial area where you do the little trial and select this bottom needle point, and that moves your needle to the very bottom of that design. So now I can go to layout. We're going to do this because so what you can do now is I can turn on that laser light. I can just move it until my needle gets to the bottom of this quilt design. Okay, and so there it's positioned. So now if I do the trial, see the design is going to stitch off right there at the bottom of my quilt design. And also, if you do it this way, so you're doing the quilting and the embroidery design in 2 different steps, the stitch numbers on your machine are going to line up and be the same stitch numbers that are on your instructions. So that may be a little bit easier for you, is actually do it in 2 separate steps. Okay, now we're going to start sewing. Okay, so now on these instructions, and I'm not sure what page number it is, but it has block by block quilting technique. These are the steps that we're going to do for the quilting design, okay? Because these instructions are not on the block instructions. These are separate. So first thing it stitches off is a placement line for the batting. And again, remember I cut my batting 7 by 9. Okay, and then you want to lay your batting on top of this placement line. And again, I'm doing mine with the off-white color thread, so it's kind of hard to see. Sometimes I'll spray my batting with 505 spray, but because I'm going to have to trim it down, you get 505 all over your fingernails. So I'm just going to take the 505 stick and kind of rub it on my stabilizer and then lay the batting over that placement line. Make sure this technique is it's a little bit bigger. Again, remember this is Kimberbell's technique. Next month I'm going to show you mine. And then it's going to stitch the tack down. After it stitches the tack down, then you're just going to go in and trim your batting next to that tack down line on all 4 sides. So I've got the batting trimmed, and now what it's going to do is stitch a placement line for my fabric. And this is your background fabric. And so I'm going to go ahead and I don't like doing the 505 stick on the batting, so that's why I did it on my stabilizer to lay the batting down. And now I'm going to do the 505 stick just on my background fabric. And again, you can either use the stick or the spray. Right, then you're just going to lay your background fabric over that. Make sure you're kind of getting it centered, and you know that your fabric is extending past that placement line all the way around. Try to also, especially this one since it's the stripes, try to lay it straight on your hoop. And then it's going to stitch the tack down. And after it tacks the fabric down, now it's just going to start doing the quilting. So it's going to take about 5 minutes to stitch the quilting design, so we will be back. Okay, so after it does the quilting, we are now done with these instructions, okay? And it says, follow the embroidery instructions to complete the design on the quilted background. So now we're going to go back to our design, the flower instructions. And so we're doing the block by block quilting. We've done this part of it, and it says if doing the block by block quilting, skip to machine step 3. So what we're going to do is we are not doing option number 2. So we're not going to be doing, ignore this whole side of the page, come over here, and step number 3 is going to be stitch the dark stem. So we're just going to go directly into the embroidery design. We're skipping these 2 steps and all of this on the other page, because that's if you were trying to align your fabric up just on your hoop without the quilting design. So step number 3 of our design is going to be the stems. And so we're going to do the dark green, the light green, and then it goes and it does the little kind of purpley blue color, little circles, and then it goes back and does the dark green inside the leaves. So we need to find that on our machine, because now we're skipping through those first 3 steps or 2 steps on the design. And so this is where, because we've combined our background quilting and our embroidery design, this is where our steps are going to be different on our machine per the instructions. So I'm just going to start forwarding down until I find the leaves, and voila, there are the leaves, because the leaves are going to be step number 3. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I'm going to do is just thread up with the dark green, do that, the lighter green, the bluish color, and the bluish color is the Cadet Blue 3331. And then go back to the dark green and stitch the detail. And so all that's just embroidery, and then we'll get into the applique. So we'll come back when we're ready to do the applique. Okay, so it finished stitching all of just the embroidery part. Okay, now we're to the applique part. So we're on step 7 of the instructions, and so this little icon means that kind of doesn't really matter what color thread you're using, but I'm going to go ahead. We're going to start the applique for the orange fabric, and it's going to do the placement line, the tack down, and then go directly into the satin stitch. So I've just gone ahead and threaded up with kind of the peachy color thread. And so what it's going to stitch first is the placement line. I'm going to just lay the fabric down. Make sure you're covering up that whole placement line. On that first block, I kind of got skimpy down here at the bottom, and I barely had enough to trim away. Now, you could use your 505 glue stick if you wanted to, but I'm just going to lay that down, and I can kind of hold it in place until it starts tacking it down. But now this is going to be the tack down step. And usually on all of her tack down steps, she goes around it twice. Okay, so now it's stitched the tack down, and so now we need to trim it. And so if you haven't ever done applique in the hoop before, it does the placement line, you lay your fabric down, it does the tack down, and then when you go in and you trim it, you just want to try to get as close as you can to those tack down lines. And this is why the little double curved scissors will help you get down in your hoop. And I try to always have the design, you know, the fabric that I'm leaving, I have it up above me, and then I lay my scissors down below it. And so I keep kind of rotating the hoop around as I trim my fabric, and I kind of pull up on the applique fabric just a little bit. I butt the bottom of the scissors up against that stitch, and then I just kind of, and so I kind of pull it back and then go back up in there. I just do little snips at a time all the way around. And this has several little petals, so we'll come back once I am done trimming all of this. Okay, I've got it trimmed down, and now it's just going to do what they call the cover stitch or the satin stitch around the flower. And after it does the satin stitch, it's going to start doing the placement line, tack down, and then the little decorative stitch for the other sets of flowers. And this is going to be kind of the peachy pink fabric, and so I've threaded up with the peachy pink color thread. It's the one that's the shrimp. No, it's corsage. That one is corsage 1840. And so, and this is just going to do the placement line. It did one placement line here, and then it's doing another one down here, but you can cover up both of those placement lines with the one piece of fabric. And you may have to kind of angle it, just make sure you're covering up both of them, and then stitch the tack down. And now we're just going to go in and trim all of this away on both flowers. Okay, after we trim both flowers, then it's just going to do a little decorative stitch. That's the cover stitch. The next thing that's going to stitch is going to be kind of the little lines, stamen maybe on this flower, and so it's the inside of this. So we're going to do that in the darker gray color. Okay, so after it does the little stamen in the darker gray color, now we're going to do the placement line, the tack down, and the little cover stitch for the lighter pink color. And so I've threaded up with the lighter color. I just wrote in my box pink, light pink. And so it's going to do the placement line first. And again, it's on both flowers, but we're just going to use the one piece of fabric. Just make sure you're covering both of them up, and then do the tack down. And after it does the tack down, now we're just going in and trimming both of these. And now it's just going to do the cover stitch. That's a little decorative stitch. Now, while that's stitching, I also want to show you, okay, so we're doing step 16, stitch the flower 3 front petals decorative outlines, and then it says using a seam ripper, remove the background basting line. But also in highlight, it says skip this step if you're doing the block by block. So we don't have a basting stitch around this because we're doing the block by block. So when you're done stitching, full decorative stitch will be done, except we do need to trim it down. And so once we're done stitching, we'll go to the cutting table and we'll trim it down to size. So once we're done, we can go ahead and unhoop it. And then on the instructions, it's explaining how to use the orange pop rulers. And so it's saying to place the 6.5 by 8.5 orange pop ruler on it. If you don't have the orange pop rulers, basically what you're wanting to look for is square the block to 6.5 by 8.5. So you can use your regular rulers. You can usually use like this outside line as a guide, but you don't want to necessarily cut directly on that line because your fabric has maybe drawn up just a little bit from all the embroidery and everything, but that line is close to a 6.5 by 8.5. If you're going, I'm going to show you how to use the orange pop rulers if you haven't ever used those. So there's a rectangle set and a square set. And so we're going to use for these blocks the rectangle set, and this one is called the 6 by 8. Can you see that? Lay it down right there maybe. Maybe lay it down right here. Sorry. So we're cutting it to 6.5 by 8.5, but once you sew it into the quilt and take your 1/4 inch seam, the finished size of the block is going to be 6 by 8. So we're going to cut it to the 6.5 by 8.5. With the orange pop rulers, you are cutting on the inside here, not on the outside. And the way they were designed is so that if you didn't have this little line out here that we can kind of use as a guide, it helps you to kind of center up your design and all. But what I like to do, since we have that little stitch line, is just center it up kind of with that line. And again, it may not be exactly on that, but that kind of helps you get it straight and all. And then I'm also using Kimberbell's rotating mat, because once you have this ruler on here, you don't want to have to keep rotating your fabric around. So once you have it laid down there, take your cutter, and one of the straight cutters really works best for the orange pop rulers because you want to be able to hold your cutter straight up and down. And we're going to be cutting to the inside here, and we use these little channels in the ruler to get started. And the main thing you want to remember is keep your blade butted up against this ruler, because what a lot of people do is they veer off. So just keep that blade pushed up against the ruler, hold it straight up. As you go along this side, go all the way into that channel, and then just rotate the mat around. Start here, keep it up against the ruler all the way into the channel and just rotate it around. And once you've done all 4 sides, you can just take that out if your cutter didn't skip on you in a couple of places. There we go. And it is cut down to size. And so then you will just repeat those same steps for the second block. So you're going to do 2 blocks. And this month you are also going to be receiving the embellishment kit. So in the embellishment kit you're going to have all of the buttons, any of the glitter sheets, the felt, anything like that that we're going to be using on the quilt. And in the little January bag, you have the 2 black buttons that are going to be stitched on the center of the orange flowers. And then you have these little Hot Fix crystals that you can put on the ends of each of the little stamen here. I would probably wait and do this type of embellishment after you have the quilt top put together, and that way, like when you have these blocks and you're stitching them, you know, right sides together and things like that, the buttons and all aren't in your way. I'm going to wait to attach those. That's all.